are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 58 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. Connect with us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast, or swing by our Facebook page, Social Media and Politics Podcast. All right, y'all. As ever, thanks so much for tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about targeted Facebook ads and Facebook's initiative to be more transparent in the organizations and money being put behind Facebook ads ahead of the 2018 U.S. midterms. But specifically, I'm going to be speaking with Søren Pedersen. He is a software developer who works for the Danish media outlet Ekstrabladet, or Ekstrabladet, which is a tabloid newspaper in Denmark. And Søren has done some really interesting work creating a website called uspolads.com. And US Poll Ads basically uses web scraping from the Facebook ad archive to present data in a different way, and some might argue in a more valuable way. Now, what I think is interesting about Søren's work is it follows some of the other initiatives we've talked about on the podcast, like Who Targets Me, where citizens, or in this case, a citizen, uses technology and a bit of programming to bring transparency to what's going on social media platforms that maybe the platforms aren't revealing themselves, or in the case of the Facebook ad archive, aren't really releasing the information in a way that's very conducive to analyzing this data. So before bringing Søren on to talk about U.S. poll ads, I want to give a little bit of pretext into the Facebook ad archive. And what it is a searchable database of political ads that focus on politics or, quote unquote, issues of national importance. And those can vary from country to country. But for the U.S., they have initially a list of 20 terms that include things like taxes, terrorism, infrastructure, guns, education. So you get the idea. Sort of policy issues that candidates or organizations might campaign for during an election. So in terms of what data you can get from the ad archive, you can see whether ads are active or inactive, basically whether they're running right now or not. If they were in the ad archive and then later disapproved through content review or people reporting the ad. You can see the duration of how long the ad was run. You can see the number of impressions, which is sort of rounded. You either see like 1,000 impressions or 5,000. You don't get the exact number. You can see the amount spent, again, in this sort of rounded up or rounded down, we don't know, range, approximate range of dollars spent. And I think what's most interesting is you can see some demographic information about the ad. So you can see what age ranges were targeted. And particularly, I think the most interesting is the genders that were targeted. And if you go in the Facebook ad archive, you can see very clearly some ads that were targeted only to males, or you can see sometimes where it's 50-50. And lastly, you can see some information about the location from where the ad was viewed. Now, this is all fine and good, except for the fact that when you go onto the Facebook ad archive, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes if you want to go check it out for yourself, it's precisely the searchability of the archive that limits its utility for researchers and the interested public, because you have to go and type in a keyword. So to an extent, you have to know what you're looking for. And once you do, you're brought to a page that shows the ads themselves in chronological order. So you'll see the most recent ones first. And in my experience anyways, playing around with this, the ads that you see might be very kind of small dollar ads. They might have not been seen by that many people. And I mean, I get that's important to know, but really my beef is that a lot of times you'll see the same ads with minor shifts in the content or minor shifts in the demographic targeting, but that creates a sort of flood of information that's very hard to get an overall picture of what's going on. Also, in terms of searchability, again, because you have to know what you're looking for, it's hard to get a kind of overall sense of what's going on. So the only way to do that is to get at it through web scraping, which is exactly what Søren Pedersen has done in building his uspolads.com site. But I should note before cutting to the interview that last month, Facebook announced that they are going to open up an API for select researchers, academics, media organizations, and watchdogs that should, in theory, allow these groups to pull the data and analyze it in a way that, again, is more valuable to the public. But as we discussed in episode 53 of this podcast with Dr. Dean Freelon, there have been academics that have applied for this access and have been denied. So the criteria is not quite transparent yet. And when you apply for access to this API, you have to explicitly say what you're using this data for or what your project is looking to do, which basically allows Facebook to be in control of the data access to the platform. And there might be some political ad data set made available through the Social Science One initiative where researchers will decide what projects are to be allowed data access. Now, that has its own set of issues in terms of who's allowed to apply and the criteria deciding who will be granted data access. And that's why I think it's so cool that we have initiatives like USPollAds.com that uses web scraping to sort of get at this data and make it more transparent. So we're going to get into that in just a second, and we're also going to talk about some of the initiatives that Søren has built in Denmark using Facebook and Twitter data to sort of use social media data in a way that is useful for the study of politics. It gives us a deeper sense of what's going on. And again, I love these civic initiatives being done by, in this case, an independent programmer in Denmark. So even if you're not so familiar with the Danish context, I think the whole idea and execution of these projects is fascinating. So without further ado, let me bring on Søren Pedersen. Again, he is a software developer that works for the Danish tabloid Ekstrabladet. Søren, thanks for taking the time out and welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thank you.
So I want to get into all these different platforms and websites you've been developing with social media data. But first, I'd like to ask a bit about your motivations for building these platforms, because I think it's super interesting that a single person with an interest and understanding of technology can reveal some insights about politics we hadn't been able to see otherwise. So before getting into the specifics of the various platforms, could you talk about your professional background and your motivations in building platforms with social media data?
Yes, I'm actually educated in political science, but I'm a child of the 1980s Commodore 64 era. So I was brought up with data. But after a long time in the university with political science, I came back into data and computer programming. And I think that combination of me having this political insights and then also the technological perspective just really made it very easy for me to see all these possibilities that there are with social media data, because there's so much data available, and it's just, for me, I can't resist just whenever I see this data, I need to take it down and aggregate it and see all the connection in it and just put it out in a provocative way to see if I can get some discussion going.
So let's get right into your latest project, USPollAds.com. And I first want to ask about the kind of thought processes in designing the site, because I was playing around with the official Facebook archive, and there you need to enter a keyword before you get any glimpse of the political ads. And then once you enter a keyword, you need to kind of click on each ad to get to the data, like the number of impressions, the number of money spent, and the gender of users who've seen the ad. So your site has a different kind of UX or user design layout. And I think it's actually much more user-friendly. So how did you program it, and what were the decisions in sort of laying out that interface?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I think it's great that Facebook is putting out this data available. But the issue with their website is that you need to know what to search for before you go in there, and you can't really get any aggregated data. The first thing you think about when talking about political ads is obviously the most popular questions. Who's spending the most money on this? Who's paying for these ads? And you can't really see that on their site. So I thought, well, the data is there. I need to get it down and aggregate it in a different way and provide some filters and sorting possibilities. So that was the point of departure for doing this. Then it got really complicated very fast, because Facebook is not making it easy to get those kind of data. So yeah, I put up a lot of bots that are scraping information from the Facebook ad archive regularly, and then aggregating it in different ways and sorting and filtered in different ways.
And that's super interesting. And I want to ask you about those kind of unsanctioned scraping methods a bit later in the episode. But, Facebook opened up an API for this ad archive back in August. So you're not using that.
That API is as far as I know, only available to a very few select people. And I'm not even sure that they have it yet. But there have been some official mentioning that a few US scientists might have access to it. I haven't actually seen anything from it yet. But they have created an API, that's right. And they have plans on delivering a more useful websites where you can do some of the things that I have made available already.
But you kind of went around and did it.
I wanted to make this available right away.
That's super cool. So again, in thinking about what's being prioritized and shown to users, the Facebook ad archive, like I said, you need to type in a keyword and then it sorts by chronology. And what that means is that, you get a lot of these kind of, I have to be careful using the term junk ads, but they're very low impact ads. They're, maybe costing less than $1,000 and being seen by not so many people. Whereas your site seems to be more focused on relevance. Like if I go to US poll ads, I'm going to see ads that have, spent over $50,000 or been shown to like 100,000 people. So was that a key kind of metric for you in showing relevance versus chronology?
I wouldn't say relevance because, we can't really say that spending a lot of money is relevant. But I just had the feeling that this was interesting. I wanted to see who is spending a lot of money. And so I just created this specific sorting mechanism. You can't really say that it's the most relevant one, but it's always interesting to follow the money, as we say, in social media. And so you get those Sandy Hook commercials, you get some Trump commercials and all that. There's even some merchandise, political merchandise, are pretty far up at the top, which is also interesting. But yeah, you get a different view on this.
And what for you is the most important metric that's offered by the ad archive?
Well, I think money spent is obviously extremely interesting, and it will get even more interesting the closer we get to midterm, because we know that this is going to have a big impact on the election. Who is spending the most money? Who has the more money? We know that for sure that this is going to influence elections all over the world. So just putting out this information is obviously very, very important. Let me just say that after Facebook published their ad archive, Twitter did it right afterwards, and then Google came with their ad archive a few months ago. And actually Google already made it possible to apply all these filters and sortings. And I think we're going to see Facebook do the same thing, actually, in a very short time.
And have you been sort of analyzing this data in any way, or are you just putting it out there?
I'm just putting it out there. I haven't really had time to do some advanced statistics on this. The other problem is that I'm not really sure that I have all the ads, because it's in the same way as the end user has to know what to search for. My bots need to know what to search for. So I'm putting sort of many different mechanisms to try to get all the ads. I try to search for all ads with the letter A and then the letter B and then the letter C, and I just go through everything, and then I search for a large number of common first names, and then I get all the ads for that first name. But I can't really be sure that I have all the ads. So even if I did an analysis of this, I wouldn't be comfortable because I might be missing out. I said to another reporter that I think I might have maybe 30% of the ads that are available, because there are so many. I can't remember the number, but I think Donald Trump, he was running about 2,000 ads when I checked the last time.
Yeah, and it's just hard to capture them all with these dictionary methods. So I'm curious about this part from both Facebook's side and from your side as well. I would imagine that Facebook is kind of tracking which ads users are clicking on and the keywords that they are searching for. And I'd imagine you'd have that technology as well. Are you doing that? Are you harvesting that, where users are clicking on your site?
Do you mean on my side or no, not really. No. I haven't really, as I said, I haven't really done any advanced analysis of all this. I wanted to put this out primarily to get some discussion going. And I think just me putting this out, and I know that Facebook, some people in Facebook have seen it as well. I mean, I'm just pushing a little bit so they might actually move a little bit faster with a better interface for them as well. So it's a little bit of pressure, me putting a little bit of pressure on Facebook, but it helps everything that you do in this respect.
Yeah, definitely. And that brings me to my next question, which is, here we are in Denmark, and I'm curious as why a Dane would be doing this for the kind of U.S. political ad market. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Well, I actually did this for the Danish politicians and parties first. Unfortunately, we don't have that much data available in Denmark right now. It's only in the US that you have this extra information on demographics and spending. We don't have that in Denmark. So after I built the Danish site, which is way more popular than the American I did, it has a lot of focus on my Danish initiative on political ads. Then Facebook launched this political ad archive, and I saw all this data, and I thought, well, I need to get hold of this. So obviously, I lived in the US as well, so I'm naturally interested in this. But what is more important for me is I'm triggered by this data. I mean, it's so interesting to have this, and I could get the demographics, I could get the spending and the location. So I thought, well, I need to get this and also develop my scraping techniques, because this was very challenging.
And where'd you live in the U.S., just out of curiosity?
I lived in New York for 6 months.
Okay, cool. And so basically you built the Danish site, and then you could take a lot of that script, I'm assuming, over to the U.S. version.
Yeah.
Cool. So I want to go into your Danish projects in a second, but let's talk a little bit about, and this is something we talked about in episode 53 with Dr. Dean Freelon, was the use of sanctioned data collection methods and unsanctioned data collection methods. So obviously you're doing something that sort of goes around the official Facebook ad archive, and you're developing programming scripts that can pull data, basically using web scraping, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on using unsanctioned methods to acquire some of this data?
Well, there's a lot of people harvesting data from Facebook, and we've seen some of the more unfortunate consequences of that with the Cambridge Analytica and all that. I'm pretty sure that my project is violating tons of terms of service on Facebook as well. But this is something I'm not really uncomfortable doing, because I think I'm pushing for a greater good here. And I find it very hard to imagine that Facebook would be extremely worried about me doing this, because obviously I think they're gonna launch an interface that is probably much better than the one I did already, but they're gonna do that in the future. So as I said before, I'm just pushing them a little bit to make them move faster. But I think this is all right, and to do it when there is a greater common good. And I think we can say for sure that this is the case here, if we can sort of highlight who is spending money on political ads. I mean, that is a very worthwhile course that I find it very hard to argue against. I can't imagine Facebook would do that either.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned that you've just been putting the data out there. Do you have any plans to develop the site further? I mean, obviously it's kind of on the side of your day job, right?
Not this particular site. I mean, if they are going to publish the API publicly, and unfortunately, I don't think they're going to put the API out for everyone. I think it's going to be a very limited amount of researchers that will get access to this. If they do that, then I would be interested in doing it. But the problem here is that it doesn't really make much sense just to look at Facebook. We need to aggregate the data from Facebook, Twitter, and Google. Those three platforms will account for a very high % of the political spending now. So someone should aggregate the results and sort of align the data between the three sites, because they do it very differently. On Google, you don't really have the distinction between the advertiser and the one who provides the money. That's the one you have on Facebook. You don't really have that on Google. And Twitter is a third way. So we need some data scientist to align those three sites and create a master interface so we can see the total spending. That would be a very cool project. Unfortunately, I don't think I have the time to do it, but it's manageable, and I would really encourage anyone who is sitting out there who has the technical skills and some data scientist background, this is a very, very good project to embark upon.
Yeah, and I think, I personally would love to do this project, but what I've sort of been training myself in is to work with the APIs.
Yeah.
So the whole web scraping part and the, how do you go around the APIs when they're closed down is something that, if anyone's listening and you're, starting out programming, maybe it's worth to go the web scraping route and not the API route.
Definitely. Unfortunately, APIs are getting shut down very fast these years. I mean, I've been in the Facebook development game for almost since the beginning of Facebook, and it has gone from an incredibly platform where you could do everything, and it's just getting more and more limited what you can actually access through the API, and it's the same with the other platforms as well. Mm-hmm. So if you're a serious social scientist, scraping is an absolute must these days to learn.
Yes, and so we've been talking about U.S. poll ads, but I want to switch over to some of the other projects you've been working on in the Danish context, which I think are super interesting. And there's 3 that I found. If there's more, let me know. That's Jeg fortryder. Is that good enough Danish pronunciation? That means basically I regret. Alidometer.dk and Hold din kæft.dk, which basically means shut up, right?
Yeah.
So let's take Jeg fortryder first, which is basically deleting or showing the deleted tweets and Facebook posts of Danish politicians. I think there was a similar program called PolitWhoops in the U.S. So
I think it might actually still run.
I think it does.
Yeah.
But can you give us an overview into that project and kind of the reception it had in Denmark?
Yeah, unfortunately for all the projects I've been running, I had to close them down due to the GDPR legislation. So right now they're not running, but they will be up running again once I figure out what all this means with this new legislation, because it's pretty serious. You can get into a lot of trouble there when you're storing personal information. But the I Regret website was looking after using scraping again and API, immediately capturing all the tweets and all the Facebook posts of politicians in Denmark. And it was incredibly fast. So just milliseconds after a tweet, it would capture the tweet, the content of the tweet, but also taking a screenshots, which was the complicated part of this. Because, I mean, it became quite apparent, and I think this was the more philosophical argument here, that politicians on social media, they're out of control. And sometimes they just speak from on your stomach.
Yeah, the hip.
Yeah. And it just goes out there, and you get a view right into what their true identity is. So if you can catch some of those mistakes that they make, you actually get a glimpse into who they are. And I had many funny things that I captured, and once they deleted a very few seconds after, I just had it there. And it created a lot of discussion.
And so I was just like reading about the site on Google, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't one of the things that you sort of built into the script a way that would filter out if it was just a typo?
Yes, I did, because in the beginning, I just captured so many tweets that had typos. So yeah, I had to create some pretty advanced algorithms that compared. If there was a deleted tweet, I would look at the next tweet within a minute, and then I would make a textual comparison and see how much difference there were between the tweets. And if they were almost similar, I would let it go, because it was probably a typo.
That's some pretty advanced script writing.
Yeah.
And how was that received by? I mean, I can imagine that causes a bit of a stir in the Danish press.
That one wasn't actually so much. I think people mostly found it funny. I haven't actually had any bad reception on that, and I haven't had anyone who wanted things deleted that I had. I mean, you could imagine some unfortunate episodes where people would have tweeted a private photo or something like that by mistake. We've heard about that, but I never really encountered that.
So let's move on to the second project, which is Alidometer.dk. And why don't you go ahead? It's a little bit complicated to explain because it's like friends of friends, but
yeah, that was actually has been my most popular project, because I somehow captured or created an algorithm that made an extreme lot of sense in terms of who is the most influential tweeters in Denmark. And my inspiration was Google search. So instead of looking at who is creating a great tweet or who is getting a lot of reception, I'm looking at what their friends are thinking about them. So this is like Google search, really. I mean, it's referrals that counts. And that algorithm created a ranking list of the 500 most influential tweeters in Denmark. And it made a lot of sense. I mean, I had the prime minister almost at the top. Even though he doesn't tweet much, the algorithm actually managed to get him up there using the signals of who is his friends and what are their friends doing and what are their friends doing. So this algorithm created something that made sense. And the really interesting thing here was how it developed from month to month. I mean, who was getting up the rank, who was getting down the rank, who made the highest jump from one month to another, and the other way around. I had a really controversial thing there that I had to take away, actually, because I showed who unfriended each other. And that made a lot of noise. That was very uncomfortable for people that I sort of kept an eye on that.
And I mean, this sounds like a fascinating research project. Have you thought about writing it up into a paper?
Yeah, I think it made a lot of sense. And when Twitter, a few months ago, they asked for researchers to send in proposals on how to identify quality tweets or quality accounts. And I actually thought a lot about going into that because I thought I had an algorithm that can actually, at least it can identify tweeters with a very high quality that people respect. So yeah, I think it could have made sense to use some parts of that in filtering out all this noise that we have on Twitter. But unfortunately, time again was prohibitive.
Surely. And so moving on to the third one, Hold din kæft, or shut up.dk, is really interesting, I think, also in terms of, some of this controversy has been going around really recently in terms of teens and tech addiction, for example, where you basically offered an incentive for 50 Twitter users in Denmark to not post on Twitter, and you would donate a certain amount of money to charity per day, up to about $1,500. But there's an interesting caveat where you didn't think you'd spend that much. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about that initiative?
Well, this was definitely my most fun project and the one that got me the most exposure. I think I've been in virtually every media in Denmark talking about this. This was a very personal thing from the beginning because, I mean, I have a problem with addiction on social media, as many others have. I quitted Facebook many, many years ago. I couldn't control it, and I just got rid of it, and it helped. But obviously, the abuser finds some other drug, and I found Twitter, and I was just spending way too much time on this. Time that I could have spent doing something much more productive, like writing some great code or writing a book or an article. I was just sitting there on Twitter writing stupid things and getting into silly arguments, like many of us does. So I think, well, how can I do this and how can I make something that is extremely provocative? And I thought, well, I identified some of the 50 loudest people on Twitter, some very high-ranking people in Denmark, journalists, politicians, marketing people, some very well-known figures. And I keep very close track of them. I mean, extremely close track. I register everything they do on Twitter, not only tweeting, but also liking and retweeting and quoting and everything. And some of that part actually required me to go outside the API as well. But once I had that, not only could I obviously see if they did shut up or not, so I could pay them that money to the charity. But what I could also see, and the one that caused a lot of noise, was that I could sort of calculate how many hours they spent on Twitter each day. And that was that caused a lot of noise. A lot of people got really angry with me on that because there were people spending 2-3 hours, maybe average, but up to 4 or 5 hours. And this was some of the very, very well-known people that I could see were spending a lot of time. I mean, I don't know how much time they have the actual Twitter app open, but I was using some research from IBM that every time you look at an app or every time you digress to something, we know that our mind is sort of caught up in that in 10, 15 minutes. So I was using that to calculate some sort of average time that I think that they were using likes and retweets and quoting. So I came up with this so they could see on the site how many hours they were spending each day. They didn't like that because it's not nice to being told that you're spending 5 hours on Twitter every day.
Yeah, but at the same time, while people might view this as sensitive and, for obvious personal reasons, I mean, this is why we have GDPR, for example, right?
Yeah.
This sort of data protection. Yet, what it makes me think about is something we've talked about on the show before, is this idea of cyber attacks through social media. I mean, you have people in Iran and China and Russia that are using these metrics in order to target high-profile politicians or their staffers when they're most active on Twitter. So this kind of making a big fuss, whether it's researchers or sort of private people.
Yeah.
I mean, the data is out there and it can be used in any way. So on the one hand, data protection is good, but as we've talked about, there's unsanctioned methods that, these sort of malicious actors, they're using it.
Yeah.
So
I think that people are just not aware of how much data they put out there and what you can do with it. And it's really just about visualizing this in a very easy way. What I did was I created a 24-hour chart of where their activity was. And it was extremely apparent for all these 50 people when they got up in the morning and when they got to bed. And just having that information when you go to bed and when you get up in the morning. And I could see all sorts of funny things. I mean, I could see when they woke up in bed, because that's usually when they start doing stuff on Twitter. And then I could see, well, then it stopped. They're probably in the bathroom now or taking a shower. And then they got back and now they're eating breakfast now. And then there was a pause and they're probably on the way to work. And then there was a spike in activity as well. And the same in the evening. And it was just, that actually made me uncomfortable. And I wasn't thinking about that this was possible, but it was very easy to do.
Jeez. Yes. Interesting stuff. And I want to ask as my sort of final question, well, actually I have two. And one has to do with, as you mentioned before, this GDPR. So you've decided to kind of close down these projects. Yeah. Is that because of the kind of legal implications, the fines that you might get from GDPR?
Yeah, we heard a lot about those fines. Right now, it's just up in the air what is going on. I mean, we haven't seen anyone sanctioned yet, even though, I mean, every single media is breaking the rules in this right now. But we're still waiting for what's going to happen. I mean, who is going to take these people to court? And I think nothing is not really not going to happen. And it's very unlikely that they would go after someone like me. But anyway, I got a little bit nervous there, I must admit. So I took it down and I just wanted to see what's going on. But I would put it up again. And I might be putting it up as a media. And so there are some different rules. If you're a news media, you can do more things without getting into trouble. So I'm kind of looking at different options there to launching these things again.
Yeah, because I was just writing an application recently and, it involves social media data and you have to state the ethics and, you're not allowed by GDPR to process personal data, except for exceptions. And that's the interesting part. Yeah. And there's a lot of national laws. So I was applying to do work basically out of Sweden. And at least there, I don't know about Denmark, there's certain national laws that say you can process data if it's in the public interest. And the question is, what is the public interest, right? So that's a question maybe for another podcast. Yeah. But my last question has to do with kind of your future work. I mean, you've got U.S. poll ads running right now. The midterms are coming up. Do you have any sort of initiatives planned or something that you'd like to get to?
Well, I must say I'm actually looking into doing something interesting for the next U.S. elections. I have a bit of time. I'm not sure I'm going to make it to midterm, but I'm definitely going to put up something interesting once we reach the next presidential election. I want to get something ready there. I think it's not many people are doing anything here. And if we have any students listening to this podcast, I really want to encourage the students to get into this field of collecting data and scraping and analysis. I mean, there's obviously for the greater good, because there's just so much data out there, and it's so interesting. You can do so many things, and it's cool, it's fun, and while you're having fun, you can also do something that is really important. So if I can give a good advice to any students, that this is what you need to go into.
Great advice. I totally stand behind that. And with that, let's close it down. Søren, thanks so much for taking the time out.
Thank you.
I've just been speaking with Søren Pedersen, software developer for the Danish tabloid Ekstrabladet. Check out his website, uspolads.com. And that'll do it for this episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Join us next time when we talk with Dr. Bruce Schneier from Harvard University about his new book, Click Here to Kill Everybody, where we'll look at the potential pitfalls of the Internet of Things and the potential risks of social media for data privacy in the future. Until then, I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.